Imagine a lush, vibrant cabbage sitting directly next to one being eaten alive by aphids, yet the healthy plant remains completely untouched. We've been taught that pests are inevitable invaders, but in reality, a truly healthy plant is biologically invisible to the insects that want to destroy it. Most farmers and gardeners spend their lives in a state of chemical warfare, armed with a cocktail of pesticides to defend their crops from the enemy. We view insects as opportunistic predators waiting for a moment of weakness. But what if the weakness isn't a moment? What if it's a permanent physiological state we've accidentally created? Think back to the last time you saw a forest or a wild meadow. No one is out there with a spray rig, yet the ecosystem doesn't collapse under the weight of an infestation. This leads us to a startling realization. The presence of a pest is not a sign that nature is failing, but a diagnostic signal that the plant's internal chemistry is broken. Take the story of John Kempf, a farmer who grew up in the world of conventional intense agriculture, watching his family's crops succumb to disease year after year despite using every modern chemical available. One season, a field of cantaloupes was split down. The middle half had been treated with heavy fertilizers, the other half had not. When a massive wave of powdery mildew swept through, it stopped exactly at the border of the untreated section, leaving those plants pristine. This wasn't luck, it was a biological hard stop that defies everything we are taught about protecting plants. We have been looking at the insect through a magnifying glass, when we should have been looking at the sap through a microscope. The secret lies in a concept that sounds simple but changes everything: the difference between a nitrate and a protein. In a struggling plant, nitrogen sits in the leaves as simple, free nitrates, essentially sugary, watery building blocks that haven't been processed yet. To an insect, this is a five-star buffet because their primitive digestive systems are designed to process simple sugars and nitrogen compounds. They literally cannot digest complex proteins. But here, where it gets interesting. When a plant is truly healthy, it performs a metabolic miracle called protein synthesis. It takes those simple nitrates and, using energy from the sun and minerals from the soil, weaves them into complex, long-chain proteins. At this exact moment, the plant becomes indigestible to the pest. To a grasshopper or a larval beetle, a high-protein, healthy plant isn't food, it's toxic. If they eat it, they cannot break it down, and it will literally ferment in their gut, killing them. Nature has built an invisible fence around the healthy, and we've been tearing that fence down for decades. Why haven't we heard this before? It's not a conspiracy, but it is an economic reality. The global agricultural industry is built on the sale of highly soluble fertilizers: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These fertilizers are like fast food for plants. They make them grow big and green very quickly, but they bypass the plant's natural filtering system. By forcing a plant to take up massive amounts of nitrate, we essentially turn the plant into a giant, glowing neon sign for every pest in the county. We create the hunger, and then we sell the cure in a plastic jug. And this changes everything about how we look at organic versus conventional. It's not just about avoiding chemicals, it's about achieving a level of physiological integrity where the chemicals aren't even necessary. If you look at the plant health pyramid, you see that the first two stages of immunity are purely based on photosynthesis and protein chemistry. If a plant can't manage its sugar and nitrogen correctly, it can never reach the higher stages of immunity, where it begins to produce essential oils and terpenes, the aromatic compounds that actually repel insects before they even land. So how do we fix a system that is designed to fail? The answer isn't in a new spray, but in the microscopic world beneath our feet. The reason modern plants are leaking nitrates is that they lack the trace minerals like magnesium, sulfur, and molybdenum required to turn those nitrates into proteins. Without molybdenum, for example, a plant's nitrate reductase enzyme simply stops working. It's like a factory where the assembly line is moving, but the workers who tie the final knots are missing. The product piles up, unfinished and raw. That's not the full story, though. For these minerals to be available, the soil needs a living bridge, the microbiome. In a healthy soil system, fungi and bacteria act as the plant's external digestive system, pre-digesting minerals and delivering them in a form the plant can use instantly without wasting energy. When we tilled the soil and drenched it in salt-based fertilizers, we killed the bridge. We forced the plant to eat raw food, which left it bloated with the very sugars that insects crave. Practical soil fixes start with a shift in perspective. Stop feeding the plant and start feeding the soil's biology. This means keeping the ground covered with living roots, reducing disturbances like tilling, and ensuring that trace minerals are present in the right ratios. It sounds slow, but the results are often visible within a single growing season. Farmers who have made this transition report something that sounds like science fiction. They watch as swarms of insects fly over their fields to land on the chemically supported farm next door. Their plants aren't just surviving, they are being actively ignored by the predators. We've spent a century trying to kill the pest, but the pest was never the problem. The pest was the messenger, telling us that the plant was nutritionally bankrupt. When we realize that health isn't the absence of disease, but the presence of functional integrity, the entire war on nature becomes obsolete. We don't need better poisons, we need better biology. The next time you see a bug on a leaf, don't reach for the spray. Ask yourself, what is this plant missing that it has invited its own destruction? The answers are hidden in the soil, waiting for us to stop fighting and start listening. The shift from reactive killing to proactive cultivation changes more than just the harvest. It changes the gardener. When you stop viewing your plot as a battlefield and start seeing it as a complex biological engine, every failure becomes a data point. But this raises an even deeper question. If the chemistry of the plant determines whether an insect can eat it, what does that same chemistry do to us when we eat it? There is a direct correlation between the invisible plant and the nutrient-dense food our bodies were designed to thrive on. A plant that is immune to pests is a plant that is overflowing with the secondary metabolites, antioxidants, flavonoids, and complex proteins that modern medicine is constantly trying to synthesize in a lab. We aren't just missing out on clean food, we are missing out on the medicine that nature intended to be our primary fuel. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most uncomfortable, realization. We have built an entire food system on obese plant crops that are heavy in weight but light in substance, kept on life support by a cycle of chemical intervention. The good news is that biology is incredibly resilient. The moment we stop interfering and start supporting the soil's natural intelligence, the system begins to heal. The fungi return, the minerals flow, and the invisible fence of immunity goes back up. True sustainability isn't about doing less harm. It's about restoring the functional integrity that was there all along. We don't have to reinvent the leaf, we just have to let it work. If we can bridge the gap between the soil and the sap, we don't just solve the pest problem, we solve the nutrition crisis at its very root. How would your approach to your own garden or food choices change if you saw every pest as a nutritional warning light rather than an enemy? The transition from a killing mindset to a cultivating mindset doesn't just change the soil, it changes our entire definition of food quality. If a plant is so nutritionally incomplete that it invites pests to dismantle it, we have to ask a terrifying question. What happens to the human body when it tries to build itself out of that same incomplete material? We have inadvertently created a food system that prioritizes bulk over balance. Because we measure success in bushels per acre rather than nutrient density per gram, we've flooded our markets with plants that are effectively obese, full of simple sugars and water, but lacking the complex medicinal compounds that should be there. But here, where the realization becomes a revolution. When a plant reaches that peak state of immunity, the top of the pyramid, it begins to produce secondary metabolites. These are the polyphenols, antioxidants, and essential oils that give a tomato its real smell and a pepper its true bite. These aren't just flavors. They are the very compounds that human science identifies as anti-inflammatory and anti-carcinogenic. By fixing the plant's immunity to pests, we are simultaneously fixing the human body's access to medicine. That's not the full story, though. This shift requires us to embrace a bit of system tension. To achieve this level of health, we have to stop looking for the silver bullet in a bottle and start looking at the diversity of the ecosystem. It means realizing that a weed might be a dynamic accumulator, pulling up the very molybdenum or boron the crop needs to finish its protein synthesis. And this changes everything about our role in the garden. We move from being the commanders of the landscape to being the conductors of a biological orchestra. The practical reality is that nature wants to be healthy. The default state of a plant isn't struggle, it is vitality. Every time we see an aphid or a beetle, we aren't seeing an invader, we are seeing a biological janitor sent to clean up a mess we created through poor nutrition. If we remove the mess by balancing the soil chemistry and fostering the fungal networks, the janitors simply have no reason to show up. The pest problem evaporates because the food source for the pest no longer exists. We are standing at a crossroads in agriculture and health. We can continue the expensive, toxic treadmill of fighting symptoms, or we can step back and restore the fundamental biology that makes those symptoms impossible. The hidden truth is that a healthy plant doesn't need our protection, it needs our partnership. When we provide the minerals and the microbes, the plant provides the immunity not just for itself, but for the entire ecosystem, including us. True health isn't something you buy, it's something you build, one microbe at a time. If every pest is a nutritional signal, what is your garden trying to tell you about the food on your plate? Imagine a world where the word pesticide doesn't exist because the concept of a pest has become obsolete. We have spent nearly a century convinced that we are the only thing standing between our food and total destruction, yet the most successful ecosystems on Earth have been thriving without us for millions of years. The tension we feel today, the rising cost of chemicals, the declining health of our soil, and the mysterious surge in human chronic illness is all connected to a single biological misunderstanding. We treated the symptom and ignored the system. When you see a field being ravaged by locusts, you are seeing a cleanup crew at work. They are removing junk from the gene pool plants that fail to convert their nitrates into life-sustaining proteins. In the grand design of nature, these insects are the primary filters ensuring that only the highest quality nutrition moves up the food chain. By bypassing this filter with sprays, we've allowed low-quality, broken plants to reach our dinner tables. But here, where it gets interesting. The transition back to true plant immunity doesn't require a return to the Middle Ages or a rejection of science. In fact, it requires a more advanced science, one that understands the synergy between a manganese molecule and a fungal hyphae. It's a science of and rather than or. We can have high yields and zero pests. We can have large-scale production and nutrient density. The barrier isn't a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of incentive. The current agricultural model is built on consumables, products you have to buy every year to keep the system from collapsing. A self-healing, self-defending plant is a bad business model for those selling the cure. And this changes everything for the individual grower. You no longer have to be a victim of the bug season. You have the power to change the internal frequency of your plants by focusing on the invisible architecture of the soil. The practical path forward is a return to observation. Start with the weeds, they are the first indicators of what minerals are missing. Look at the water, is it soaking in, or is it running off because the soil biology is dead? Every observation is a step toward closing the loop. That's not the full story, though. This isn't just about saving a garden, it's about reclaiming our own biology. If we are built from the plants we eat, then our own immunity is inextricably linked to the protein synthesis of a cabbage or a grain of wheat. We aren't just what we eat, we are the health of the soil that grew it. Nature isn't trying to fight us, it is trying to teach us. The insects are the messengers, the soil is the classroom, and the harvest is the final exam. When we finally learn to pass that exam by cultivating true health, the war on nature simply ends. The hidden truth was never hidden, it was just waiting for us to look past the spray bottle. If a healthy plant is biologically invisible to a pest, what else have we been taught to fight that we could simply outgrow through better health? What is the one pest in your life that might actually be a messenger in disguise? Imagine a quiet, high-tech laboratory where the pests are kept in glass cages. When scientists place a leaf from a plant grown in mineral-rich, biologically active soil into the cage, the insects often starve to death. They will walk over the leaf, touch it with their antennae, and simply turn away. To their sensory receptors, that leaf isn't food, it's a rock. We have spent decades trying to build a better bug trap, when the most sophisticated trap in existence is the plant's own cell wall. When a plant has the correct ratio of calcium and boron, its cell walls become a physical fortress, literally too tough for the mandibles of a piercing insect to penetrate. But here, where it gets interesting. Most people think of plant health as a binary: it's either alive or it's dead. In reality, health is a spectrum of electrical conductivity and sugar complexity. When a plant is struggling, it emits a specific infrared frequency, a stress signal, that insects can detect from miles away. We are essentially broadcasting "a dinner is served" signal to every grasshopper in the county because our plants are metabolically screaming. And this changes everything about how we see the landscape. A swarm of locusts isn't an act of God, it's a response to a massive broadcast of metabolic failure. The secret to turning off that broadcast lies in the Brix level, a measurement of the dissolved solids, mostly sugars and minerals, in the plant's sap. If you take a drop of juice from a leaf and put it on a refractometer, the number you see tells you exactly how much insurance that plant has. High Brix plants don't just taste better to us, they are functionally invisible to the infrared vision of many pests. That's not the full story, though. To raise that Brix level, the plant needs a constant, balanced supply of micronutrients. Most soils have these minerals, but they are locked in a crystalline form. The only way to unlock them is through the acidic secretions of beneficial bacteria and the expansive reach of mycorrhizal fungi. By using harsh fungicides and heavy salts, we have effectively cut the telephone lines between the plant and its mineral bank. We have made the plant blind and hungry, and then we wonder why it can't defend itself. Practical breakdown: if you want to stop the pests, stop the fast food. Shift towards slow-release, organic matter-based nutrition. Use foliar sprays of seaweed or compost tea to give the plant the trace elements it needs to finish its proteins. Watch how the pests that used to plague your roses or your corn suddenly seem to lose interest. We are moving toward a new era of regenerative immunology. It's a world where the farmer is a microbiologist and the gardener is a chemist. The hidden truth is that we don't need more protection from the environment. We need to become part of the environment again. When the soil is whole, the plant is whole. And when the plant is whole, the pests simply move on to find a cleanup job somewhere else. The war is over if we want it to be. If your garden is currently struggling with a specific pest, what is that insect telling you about the unfinished chemistry of your soil? What would happen to our health if we finally stopped eating the junk that even the insects refuse to touch? The final realization is this: we have been fighting a war against nature's janitors while ignoring the mess we've made. A pest isn't an enemy to be conquered, it is a biological sensor signaling a metabolic failure. When we shift our focus from killing the bug to completing the protein, the entire paradigm of struggle dissolves. We are not victims of a hostile environment, but architects of a biological system. By restoring the minerals and the microbes, we don't just protect the plant, we unlock a level of vitality that makes defense unnecessary. The invisible fence of immunity is always available, it simply requires the right foundation. True health is the ultimate silent victory.